Camilla, you've had your pancakes. You're not quite wearing a Stetson, but you're very much in America.
I'm very much in America. I've got my Harris Waltz camouflage hat on. I've got my flag. I've got my presidential mug, which incidentally was made in China. Not sure Trump will approve. I've landed in DC for what promises to be a very, very tight election race.
We're going to go through all the latest polls, all the latest controversies from both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And this evening, Camilla, you're on your way to the last Trump rally of the election campaign.
Kamal, we are going on a road trip, going to be traveling 250 miles to Pittsburgh to see if Donald Trump can finally convince people that he is the one who can make America great again. Welcome to the Daily Tea with me, Camilla Tominey, in Washington.
And me, Kamal Ahmed, in little old London. Camilla, you posted a lovely picture last night of your flight from London to DC. How was your flight? I hope it was nice and smooth. And what's it been like arriving in America? Genuinely, we're not even 48 hours away now from voting day.
Well, everyone was complaining that I wasn't in business class, but they don't seem to know how low maintenance I am, Kamal. I went premium economy with British Airways, and it was perfectly comfortable. I don't like to mention it, but a few of the air stewards did recognise me from my this morning days, which was very sweet. And somebody actually palmed off on me just on the QT one of the toiletry bags from business. So that was my little sort of inadvertent upgrade. Landed in DC last night, took in a little bit of the local atmosphere, only because I had to go to a Walgreens. I'd forgotten to bring shampoo, and I went to a Taco Bell for some last minute fries. America is obviously in the grip of this election. You turn on the television, there is wall-to-wall coverage. The Saturday Night Live skit featuring Kamala Harris has been featuring heavily on the telly here because it's kind of being projected by all of the apps as the first thing that you can watch on your telly. We're going to get onto that in a moment. In a place like Washington, as you know, Kamal, it's pretty Democrat central. It's quite hard to find Trump supporters or Trump merch. So Louisa, our great producer, went out and got me this hat, which is apparently very in vogue because it's camouflage.
It's tricky, isn't it, with your colleague Kamal Ahmed, the presidential candidate Kamala Harris, and now Kamalaflage. It's very difficult to wend your way through all these pronunciation problems.
And we've got this mug and we've got this flag, which I've got to admit, we have just propped up in a kitchen roll because we are trying to improvise. And then after this, we're hitting the road. We've hired a car and we're going to go on the 70 highway all the way to Pittsburgh, which is going to take us 4.5 hours so that we can be among the Trump-tastic fan base for Donald and just soak up the atmosphere and bring you all of that detail tomorrow.
We'll really look forward to that. I hope you have a safe journey, and good to see that we are using the Telegraph's resources very efficiently with the use of kitchen roll to stand flags in. That's how we roll here, rather unlike the Labour government, some might say. But anyway, we'll be coming to that a little bit later.
The push and influence of celebrities on this election, I've noticed only in the short time I've been here, is huge. The Saturday Night Live thing and the idea that Harris has done it and not Trump, all of the comedians here, I mean, they are relentlessly poking fun at Trump with very little let up. From the kind of lovosphere here, the kind of Hollywood elite, they are all so pro-Harris. I do wonder what influence it has. You know, we've heard from J-Lo, we've heard from Taylor Swift, we're going to hear from Katy Perry later. That huge, huge push, it's got much more resonance this time round because of the influence of social media, but also the way that television has now become a kind of YouTube space, a space where people are campaigned to via their apps. I turned on the telly here and I was literally bombarded with pro-Harris coverage, which I just felt was a bit different. So if we were doing this 20 years ago, you know, you'd flick between a few news stations, probably get a bit more of a balanced view. So I think that's been really interesting. I did think as well, you know, I'll obviously be reporting back from Pittsburgh tomorrow. Trump does seem to be becoming a little bit desperate. Have you noticed that in his tone of voice, Kamal? Some of the bookies have been sending press releases through, basically saying that those odds have drifted. I've got two press releases here. One from Betfair. Yep, Donald Trump's odds drift significantly with one day to go. And then a very similar missive from another bookmaker back in the UK. That idea of sort of attacking the Iowa poll as being fake and then attacking journalists reporting it, I think does suggests this time last week, I was pretty convinced that Trump was going to win. And then since I've landed here, I'm increasingly thinking he might not.
I think certainly from this side of the Atlantic, Camilla, you get a sense here as well that there has been a change of tone. Before we pick up on the Trump side of it, I think let's go to Kamala Harris and Saturday Night Live, one of the biggest comedy shows, appointment to view in America. The fact that just 2 days out from actual voting day, the presidential candidate for the Democrats has lent in to the joke of her being portrayed by the comedian Maya Rudolph, who most of us will know probably from Bridesmaids, who does a very, very good impression of Harris, and Harris actually leaning into that and going for this optimism, fun, I'm ready. Let's just hear a little bit of how she handled that.
Now, Kamala, take my Pamela. The American people want to stop the chaos
and end the drama
with a cool new stepmamala. Kick back in our pajamas and watch a rom Kamala.
like Legally Blondula.
And start decorating for Christmas. Fa la 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 la. Because what do we always say? Keep Kamala and carry on a la.
It was genuinely funny, and it shows possibly a confidence running into election day. But as you say, Camilla, from Trump, slightly darker, slightly more pessimistic, but maybe he always wanted to go in to the election with people feeling fearful. He talked about he shouldn't have left the White House. He's talked about the demonic Democrats. He's clearly taken maybe not a decision, because we're never quite clear, are we, with Donald Trump, whether any of these things are strategic or simply just come into his head at the moment he's talking. It's sometimes difficult to tell. But he's gone into this last 48 hours with Harris doing optimism, future for America, and him doing, be very frightened, everyone, I'm the only person who can save America.
Yeah, and that weird sort of interlude that we had where he was acknowledging that he had protective glass around him, then gesturing to the press area. Then he says to the assembled crowd, to get me, somebody would have to shoot through fake news. And I don't mind that much, because I don't mind. And then people are saying, what are you talking about? Are you suggesting that journalists might be trying to shoot you? Then he had to clarify this idea. Was he talking about journalists being at threat of harm because he's at threat of assassination? What's he talking about here? It was all a bit confused. And as you say, Kamal, very negative in his rhetoric. And then his spokesman then has to confirm, no, it's got nothing to do with him thinking the media is being harmed. He's actually looking out for their welfare. So he's almost saying, look, I'm a target. It's a portrayal of himself, weirdly, as the underdog, which perhaps shows a lack of confidence in his own campaign. Then let's talk about this Iowa poll, because everybody's talking about that now here. Even the taxi driver, as I was coming from the airport, talking about Iowa. And this idea that this solidly Republican, all the time we've been speaking, Kamal, we've been speaking about it's going to come down to these swing states, because so many states, they're in the bag. We know which ones are red. We know which ones are blue. We always thought that Iowa was red, that it was Republican. So this poll now, from a very respected pollster, Ann Selzer, suggesting that Harris is not just 1 point ahead, but 3. I mean, I think that's rocked the Trump campaign significantly. And then you have to look at the fallout of that on the public. So the taxi driver, he was in two minds about who he was going to vote for. You know, he's not very impressed with Harris, but he thinks Trump's a maniac. That's the general positioning of most people here. And then he's thinking, he was saying to me about the Iowa poll, it seemed to be influencing him towards voting for Harris because other people seem to be doing it in a Republican state, if that makes some sense. You know, people see a little change and then they perhaps feel emboldened. Oh, maybe it's not a given that Trump's going to win. Maybe I should cast my ballot in that direction because even Republican Iowa is doing it.
There's a thing in polling called winner bias. People want to vote for the side that wins. We always have to be wary of the rabbit holes we live in. As you say, in Washington, there's a sort of rabbit hole that's hit you sort of between the eyes, which is Kamala Harris, Kamala Harris, Kamala Harris, Kamala Harris. And I wonder if it's the same tone if you go to the more deep red Republican states, the Midwest, the non-metropolitan cities, it might be a very different tone. But as you say, this Iowa poll, Trump won Iowa by nearly 10 points in each of the last two elections. His chief pollster and chief data consultant said that this was a clear outlier and was being used to drive a voter suppression narrative to President Trump's supporters. So in a way, the reaction of the taxi driver you spoke to is what Trump's side really fears.
I mean, the reason why people are trusting this poll, although we have had a lot of this rhetoric, haven't we, recently, Kamal? Oh, this pollster never gets it wrong. You had your fiery interview with Lichtman, who apparently never gets anything wrong. All of these pollsters keep on being put on pedestals. And let's be honest, pollsters often get more wrong than they get right. But anyway, the thing about Seltzer, though, is she has got a very good record because she's based in Iowa. So she's not just polling, she's also got an innate understanding of the people in that state. She was the one who predicted that a virtually unknown Barack Obama would beat frontrunner Hillary Clinton in that particular Iowa caucus, the crucial Iowa caucus that all of the people who are involved in the US election set so much store by. But I think Trump's reaction, I said earlier, didn't I, that he seemed to be getting slightly desperate. Let's just listen to how he reacted to the poll, because I think we can both agree he's a bit rattled.
So we got all this crap going on with the press and with the fake stuff and fake polls. And by the way, the polls are just as corrupt as some of the writers back there. They can make those polls sing. They can make them sing. They brag about it. I got a poll, I'm 10 points up in Iowa. One of my enemies just puts out a poll, I'm 3 down. Joni Ernst called me, everyone's called me. They said, you're killing in Iowa. The farmers love me and I love them. But they came up, they just announced a fake poll. Hey, think of it, right before the election that I'm 3 points down. I'm not down in Iowa.
What it certainly isn't, Camilla, is a fake poll. We know that. And just in case Alan Lichtman wants to shout at me again, he doesn't describe himself as a pollster. He does this analysis, which is about what type of federal government has the president been the head of, and that's how he does his judgments. So,
by the way, I am going to be inviting Alan Lichtman in for a full sit-down podcast with you in person. I will be paying for his flights, so we can all enjoy that in the coming months.
And let's not forget, Camilla, he did call it for Kamala Harris, and it's a pretty binary position he's taken. So whichever way it goes, I have asked him back on the podcast, so we can both look forward to that. It's worth saying that, first of all, the Iowa poll, whichever way it happens, is still within the margin of error. These polls have a 3.4% margin of error. So if you moved the poll and said actually it was 3.4% higher for Trump, he would obviously still win the state. So we've got to keep that in our heads. And also all those key 7 states that we went through last week, they are all still neck and neck. But as the pollster we spoke to on Friday said, with this big margin of error, it could still be a landslide for either side. I think, Camilla, the excitement of where you are is that, yes, we don't know. Yes, it could be a knife edge, or Harris could win big, or Trump could win big. And that is why this is a time when it is all now about turnout and motivating your base. And I think what Harris is trying to do, she believes that her base is motivated by optimism, the slightly more Barack Obama, yes, we can. Trump thinks his base is motivated possibly by fear. If my side don't win, America is going to the dogs. And let me warn you about that. And I think that might be the framing for these last couple of days.
Also, just another little kind of piece of insider information. All the journalists here cannot decide where to go on election night. Should we be in Florida? Should we be in Palm Beach with Trump? Is he going to win? We're thinking about it, had a number of different offers, and we're going to get to as many election night parties as we can for obvious reasons. Should we be hanging out with the Republicans? Are they going to be in celebratory mode? Should we actually be over at Howard University with Harris because she could then become crowned? I mean, it's going to be quite a moment. The first female US president, whatever you think of her. So even we are a little bit divided. And that's really, anyone here calling the election right now is lying to you. No one knows. ultimately what is going to happen. It's like going into some kind of political pick and mix with a blindfold on, filling your bag up with sweets and not knowing whether you're going to get licorice or Haribo. That's what it
we'll
is.
we'll not only have our edition tomorrow, which will be reporting, as you say, Camilla, from your journey to the final Trump rally, but we'll also have a special UK morning edition the day after the election, when you can update us on A, obviously the parties you've been to, that's the most important thing, but B, a possible result to the US election, although some people predict it could be days or even weeks before we get the full result. Tim Stanley is in the house. He has just arrived into the gallery. I see him, obviously a co-presenter of the Daily Tea podcast. And the reason I wanted Tim to come on is not only because we miss him, because he just literally hasn't been on the podcast enough. We're in a Tim Stanley drought situation. But also he did write this morning the most elegant, as always with Tim, but really interesting column on how easy it is to define Trump by the gaffes, the controversial comments, race, he is a convicted felon, and all those things are true. That's not to say they're not true, or we're trying to kind of, make give mitigating circumstances for those things. But also, why can so many people still engage with Trump in a way that is a positive vote for the type of America they want to see? So we wanted to get Tim on into the studio, and I think he's going to walk in right now as we speak. He's lifting up. He said, what now? He's just pointed. He's coming in. He's putting his jacket on. It's all very, very, here he is. Very, very live. He's actually got a poppy on as well. Camilla, have you got poppies over there? Have you not taken your poppy?
No, I haven't got poppies. I didn't take my poppy. Good point. Oh, now you've exposed me, and I'm going to get hatred online.
No.
I'm wondering
forgiveness.
no.
We're looking for forgiveness, Camilla.
I know.
That's
You know I
Daily Tea
support
way.
the poppy
That's
cause.
the Daily
I
Tea
wonder
way.
if the last time I saw Tim Stanley was on Saturday when we were
Yes.
covering the Badenoch versus Jenrick victory. God, that seems like another life. But for some reason, he had a packet of sausages in his bag along with his notebook. Not really sure why. Never really clarified it with us. Perhaps he can now.
Before we get to the column, I don't think Tim can hear you, but I will ask that question. Camilla asked a question about when we last met, the three of us, at Kemi Badenoch's winning rally for the Conservative leadership. You had a packet of sausages in your bag, uncooked sausages in your bag. We were just wondering why that was.
I was hungry.
You can't eat uncooked sausages, Tim. That would be dangerous.
I'm currently homeless. Very, very seriously, I am. Someone came round to lay some tiles in my bathroom. They discovered in the process that my shower had been leaking water into the walls for years, and my walls were nearly falling down. So my house has been gutted by the builders. I have nowhere to live, and that bag was full of my dinner and underwear, but clean underwear.
Oh,
I want to make that
Tim.
very clear.
Is the Chancellor of the Exchequer aware of this? And have you got some benefits?
I've
Have
been
they
wearing the
announced some new
same
taxes?
suit. I've been wearing the same suit for about a week now.
Okay,
and
Tim. Well,
it-
thoughts and
Tim,
prayers. We could do
Tim, I would
crowdfunding.
offer you could bunk up with my husband, because obviously there's a spare place on my side of the bed. Not sure if either of you would enjoy that, though, to be fair. Although whether your dog would get on with my cat as well could be a problem.
I'm staying on a pull-out sofa at my mum's house. My dog is loving it.
Well, thoughts and
Okay,
prayers,
good.
Tim.
Thank
we
you.
realise that you've come in there with quite harsh conditions, so we're very grateful. But Tim, take us through your piece. I explained it probably relatively poorly before you walked into the studio, but
No,
as I
very
say,
well.
there is a framing, isn't there, which is sometimes too simple from what might be described as the liberal left or progressives about, well, Trump's an ogre. How can anyone vote for him? And you had a very different type of take.
I did. I get that Britons in particular cannot get their head around why anyone would support Donald Trump. And that's partly because he is just a cliche of everything Britons hate about Americans. He's brash and gross, etc., etc. What I'm trying to argue in this piece is that there's a reason why rational people might do that. And it's because they have experienced 4 years of him. So if you look at the polls, he's doing slightly better than he was in 2016, and we think usually he's being undervalued, so he's probably going to do even better on the night. Why might he be doing better in 2016 after all these trials and accusations against him? Well, it's precisely because people have lived through 4 years. And their memory of that 4 years is there was no war, that wages increased well ahead of inflation, and crucially, unemployment and poverty levels were driven right down to historic lows, including for black people and for Hispanic people. So if there's a large number of particularly men of colour who are thinking this time of switching Republican, it's because actually they had quite a good experience. Now, of course, the obvious comeback to that is, well, Hitler built the Autobahn. Mussolini made the trains run on time. Just because someone's good at economics doesn't mean that morally they're acceptable. And I understand that. But for every allegation against Trump of some form of extreme behavior, much of which is usually true, I can come up with a curious counterexample. So Trump's a racist. Okay, he forgave debt for historically black colleges. He trimmed sentences for people who'd been imprisoned on unfairly long sentences. 90% of those who were let free early were people of color. Trump is a religious bigot. Okay, well, this is the Trump who appointed 5 openly gay people as ambassadors, who tasked someone with leading a global campaign to decriminalize homosexuality. And likewise, for everything extreme that he did, I can usually come up with a democratic example of how they carried on doing that thing. So if you don't like tariffs, well, Joe Biden imposed tariffs on China. If you don't like withdrawing from the world militarily, well, Joe Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, sticking to Donald Trump's plan. And perhaps the most significant of all is immigration. And there's a real parallel here to Britain, right? Where Labour has said, we're going to be tough on illegal asylum, but we're going to scrap the Rwanda plan. Well, Joe Biden scrapped something called Remain in Mexico, which is Donald Trump's version of the Rwanda plan, but he also got tough on illegal migration. And he kicked out over 2 million migrants who came to America. So the reality is that Democrats have governed in quite a similar way to Trump, obviously not on social issues like abortion, and with much less controversy. But nonetheless, Trump is a more ordinary president in practical material terms than the drama around him might suggest.
And Kamala Harris has very deliberately actually aped a lot of those Trump trends in her campaign. She's been seen to drop a lot of what were her previously more progressive arguments, and has
tough
become
on crime,
tough on crime, tough on immigration, has said she doesn't want to sort of change the economic agreement that Trump first launched in 2016, which was so good for the economy. Camilla, in America, Tim makes a really interesting point that in the UK, where I think the polls show, I mean, obviously we have no votes, or unless you're American, the citizen here, the polls show that something like 65 to 70% of British people think that Kamala Harris should win. So, Tim, you're absolutely right. And lots of people here think it would be unbelievably sort of immoral if anyone voted for Donald Trump. In America, is there the same tone from the Democrat side that you would be just immoral and crazy to vote for Donald Trump? Or do they see any of Tim's arguments that he's made in his article today?
Well, I think where I am in the Penn district of Washington, D.C., the idea of voting for Trump is like, well, you may as well vote for a sort of cat or dog in Springfield, Ohio, to coin a phrase. I think as you get a bit more sort of into, as you say, Rust Belt America and also some of the more Republican states, then obviously they conversely think that the idea of voting for Harris is as stupid as voting for a cat or a dog in Springfield, Ohio. So that's the major dividing line here. There is an acceptance that Trump has his faults, but he's better than the alternative for the Republicans. And then there's the acceptance that Harris has got her faults, but she's better than the alternative. But what we're boiling down to with both of these candidates is both of them are far, far, far from perfect. And that's the problem here. I mean, I think this Iowa vote's significant because it's reflecting women being very worried about Trump's stance on abortion. It may not be coincidental that 3-point lead that Seltzer's pointed out has largely come from professional working women after Iowa imposed a 6-week abortion ban. So there could be Republican-leaning women who are also thinking to themselves, but I'd like to have control over my own body and my own agency, and therefore might be really reluctantly swinging towards Harris just because they think that she's the least worst alternative.
Yeah, picking up on the abortion point, I mean, this is a good example of the strange ordinariness of Donald Trump. From his point of view, he was told in 2016, conservatives have always wanted to get rid of Roe v. Wade, so he did it. So he's done it, despite himself being probably actually pro-choice. Now he finds himself in a position in which women are abandoning the party. So he's subtly shifted his position to saying, look, I've given it back to the states, but actually I'm against a nationwide ban, and there are grounds under which abortion should be allowed. He regards himself as a moderate, and in his mind, he's moving back to the centre on this, and it's actually the Democrats who are the extreme. Now, whether you buy that analysis or not, my point is he is chasing votes. Everyone in this country thinks he's just this ideologue who's stuck on one position. And because half the country's crazy, they stick with him. No, it's a little more complicated than that. And actually, his people are worried about turnout among Christians. They think they might actually lose votes because he's not committed to a nationwide ban.
On the world stage, like abortion, but on the world stage, he's deliberately ambiguous.
Yeah.
He's quite ambiguous on Israel, Gaza. He is less ambiguous on Ukraine. There's a slightly pantomime villain, Trump, that sounds like he'll just do a deal with Putin. You do mention foreign affairs in your column. And what's your sense of how he's playing those foreign issues? I'm assuming, though, that they don't play that strongly in a domestic election in any case.
Well,
although Putin maybe.
Well, they can do, because in the case of Michigan, where it could be very close, everyone is battling for the Arab-American vote, which might go for Trump because Muslim voters are so angry about the administration's handling of Israel. Of course, this is bizarre in the minds of many because Trump is extremely pro-Netanyahu and pro-Israel. But then, I mean, I've used the word ambiguity when it comes to Trump. In a way, that's too flattering. That almost implies a degree of finesse or nuance. It's more just that he says different things to different audiences, and the first thing that comes into his head. So a few days ago, I saw him interviewed talking about Iran, and he was being pushed, given his strong position against the Iranian nuclear deal, how much he hates the Iranian regime. Why don't we just go in there and remove the regime? And he said, you can't do that. No, you can't go too far. And he immediately rode back from it. So he took a different position from the one that people might expect of him. So he would argue that what he is a madman. And he's described himself that way too, that he is presenting an image to the world of unpredictability. And that's why he can deal with dictators, because they don't know what he's going to do. Whereas the Democrats, they lay out in advance what it is they're going to do, and they get rolled over.
Camilla, you've got another 24 hours to go before the actual polling day happens. But of course, lots and lots of people have already voted. What are those? You're on your way out to Pennsylvania, but what are the last 24 hours going to look like for both sides?
I think quite dicey and quite nerve-wracking, to be perfectly honest, because they know that this is close. They're pulling out all of the stops. Interesting to have both candidates in Pennsylvania later. So as well as the Trump rally that we're going to in Pittsburgh, we're then going to see Kamala Harris out in force at a concert with Katy Perry. She will also attend a Philadelphia event today with Oprah Winfrey and Lady Gaga. So she's absolutely trying to make her kind of last hurrah box office, whereas I think Trump's will be much more among his own people as opposed to the sort of celebrity set. And then he will move on to Grand Rapids in Michigan this evening. That's the city where he finished his campaign in both 2016 and 2020. So the mood in both camps, I would say, is that they may be biting down their nails to the quick.
Can I just say, Camilla is absolutely right about this point about the candidates being unpopular. To those who say Trump is just awful and it's self-evident, if that's the case, why can't the Democrats finish him off? Likewise, if he really is a populist who speaks for the working class, why has he not won the popular vote? They are incredibly close. They divide their countries pretty much evenly. And to those who just regard this man as pure evil, well then finish him. Why can't they? And I suspect the reason... I think the Democrats think the reason why they can't beat Donald Trump was given away by Joe Biden describing his supporters as garbage. Because they do actually just think half the country's lost. Morally. Half the country's just immoral. And that's something they've got to live with and try and beat it. Well, if that's the view you take, you probably won't win.